Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to join you at this year's EUROCAE key event and to be invited to be part of this visionary talk series. I'd like to thank EUROCAE and the sponsors for the invitation. So, we're in a talk about the challenges that we face together. So, before we can get into the future, we should really talk about the present for just a minute. And the COVID 19 pandemic and the impact that it's had on our industry and, frankly, society at large. Before I start talking about the future, here's where we are today. The pandemic has had an outsized effect on aviation, larger than any impact that we've seen in the history of commercial aviation. And of course, international aviation is impacted the most, which is virtually all aviation in Europe. Activity has been constrained because of public health restrictions, and we're working at ICAO to integrate aviation regulatory requirements and guidelines with those of public health officials around the world. The Council Aviation Recovery Task Force has issued 17 separate recommendations, which are being implemented or utilized to help us restart with public health corridors and with potential vaccine passports and other checks that can get us back in the skies and returning the industry to profitability. That's a long road ahead, though. And that profitability is also going to be challenged because in places like Europe, we're also seeing demand that we accelerate the pace of change related to climate so that we reduce our carbon footprint and optimize operations so that we have less of a impact on future generations. So those two elements together put a lot of pressure on the air traffic management industry and the development of new technologies so that we can squeeze out these efficiencies in the most effective way possible. At ICAO, we're looking at a couple of steps to make this possible, and that's what I want to talk about for the rest of this talk. Over the last 20 years, we've actually reduced fuel burn by over 30% for a given seat mile, but that's not going to be enough to make actually carbon neutral targets for 2050. And coming out of the backside of the pandemic, we'll need to double down and be really creative in the way that we introduce new change into the system. We're looking for the right balance of standards, regulations, and guidance material to make that happen. And so, truly globalizing innovations in a more effective way is what I'm talking about when I talk about ICAO now. We're looking to ways that we can develop new capabilities in the system. Imagine a world where artificial intelligence and machine learning are a big part of the operating paradigm that we use in aviation safety and air traffic operations. That's the regulatory world that we want to prepare for, and also prepare communications, navigation, and surveillance to carry all of that data. To make that possible, we have three key programs that I'll talk about. The first is catalyzing regional developments like you're doing at EUROCAE and others are doing to promulgate change more quickly. This is a process called direct submission, where your initiatives can be developed and promulgated utilizing a series of steps so that they can be brought to the global stage and adopted more quickly without the long processes that we utilize at ICAO. Still peer reviewed, still assessed by the member states, and still adopted by the Council of ICAO, but done with all of the hard work right in your own region. That has regulators, stakeholders, designers, proposing your own regulations, your own specifications, your own operating procedures, and frankly, your own industrial capabilities so that controllers, pilots, and technicians are all working together. The regulatory approval also requires deep integration of cybersecurity expertise into the operation of our data networks. And we're working on a structure called the Trust Framework that can be rolled out over the next several years to make that possible. And finally, we're looking at ways to optimize the use of spectrum in an integrated communications, navigation, and surveillance program. This takes all of the processes that are available today in modern software and hardware architecture and applies them in a next generation paradigm so that we can optimize our spectrum utilization, make our software and hardware more interoperable so that we get greater redundancy and availability, and also have the ability to update our system more frequently than we do today. It's a really exciting world, and I'm looking forward to talking with all of you about it during the panel discussions coming up. Thanks for listening.